Hello guys, and welcome to episode 4 of Let's Play City Skylines. Though I might as well call it episode 5, and why that is, and why this video is so ridiculously long, I'll get to in a minute. But first I kind of want to explain what I'm actually doing in this video. I wanted to redo a lot of the foliage and add some extra detail to it, since I downloaded some new bushes at this point in time. And I also want to start work on testing a little cauliflower district in this city. Just to see how well that would eventually work. What it really entails you'll see later on. But basically this video is so ridiculously long because I decided that I wanted to actually put episode 4 and 5 into one video. If you remember, I said it a couple thousand times at this point. The first 5 episodes of this series were just recorded in one go before I even figured I would upload it to YouTube. So I couldn't really do anything with the suggestions for the city, which is fine, I suppose. I can always get to suggestions about the city later on. But one of the main problems is that I think there's just something wrong with some of the videos, which I got a lot of feedback about as well. Basically 2 points being that the time-lapses are very hard to watch, especially since moving around so much and it's at quite a high speed. So that's something that I want to change in the future. But also, I move around a lot in the game, which makes the time-lapses worse to look at, but also the quality of the video isn't really too good, and in hindsight, I might want to try and experiment with actually getting 1080p and 60 frames per second videos, though I'm still a big noob when it comes to that. So far, I've just been rendering WMV videos, 720p, 30 FPS, but it's not really too great, so that's something that I kind of want to see how I can improve it in the future as well, and, though I do have to say about that real quick, I don't know how much better I can make it, since my City Skylines just doesn't look that good, since I'm not playing in the highest settings that you can have, since my RAM just can't take it. It's already taking over 8 of my 8 gigs of RAM, but yeah, that's just a little side point there. And these points are basically why I want to, you know, at least incorporate the feedback that I've got into the videos, and this is why I kind of wanted to put episode 4 and 5 into one big video, because I figured these were the last 2 episodes that I had on my computer that I wasn't completely happy with. There were actually many shots in these time-lapses which were like minutes of me trying to figure stuff out or moving around a lot, so there's actually quite a lot of doing stuff is actually cut out of this time-lapses. I hope you guys don't mind about that. And I just figured it would be time to get both of these out there and start with a blank slate when it comes to the videos at least. And this means that I'll just be able to get back to feedback and suggestions earlier on, but it also means that I have less of an enormous gap between actually uploading videos and making them. Because right now I've made this video like 2 weeks ago and I'm currently uploading it, which is like, that time span is not really great for trying to incorporate suggestions and interaction in a city, which is just, it's just not good to have that sort of schedule. So that's also why I wanted to just get that out here. So yeah, at the end, this is just one big video with both episodes, with both of them having stuff cut out, just to make sure that it's not really too long, but also that the time-lapse is not too bad to watch, and that I can actually get to the good stuff a bit earlier, I suppose. Or at least that's the idea behind it. Now to actually talk about what I was doing over here, there's a couple of issues that I actually have with this little district, and the main issue that I have is that the city is very uncertain, or at least this district looks very uncertain of what time it was actually built. If you're at least a little bit familiar, which I am just a little bit familiar and not really too familiar with Dutch city design, but basically, during the ages, sort of, the general city design ideas changed. So, for example, in the 50s and 60s, they would have just these straight roads with row houses everywhere, shortly after the Second World War, just to make sure that there's enough housing for all the people who lost their houses and stuff, and the sudden influx of births. But then in the 70s, they decided to go with a more cozy style and have houses much more closely packed, but also actually less closely packed, but with much more parks and squiggly roads and stuff, which I'll get to later in this episode. And sort of like that, the way that districts are designed change over the years. Now my big issue with this part here is that it's very uncertain of what type of district it actually is and what time it was actually built. So far, everything in the city is at least sort of clearly later than the 90s and very recent. But this part, especially with these flat blocks over here, which are way too reminiscent of Soviet flat blocks too, it isn't really too clear what time it was built in. So this is one of the reasons why I think this is the district that I might want to return to at some point in the future, just to make sure that it's less confused in regards to what time it was actually built. It can sort of be fixed by just replacing the flat blocks with row houses, but so far I'm not really too sure if I really want to do that, but I might very well in the future. But yeah, that's basically my one big sort of complaint about this. Other than that, it was actually a lot of fun to fill in these gaps with parks and stuff, but that's also something that is going to be later in the video, so probably something that I shouldn't talk about at this point in time. But yeah, I'm generally happy with the way it's developing overall, but just when it comes to realistic details like how it's actually shaped, especially this part is sort of confused as to what type of district it really is. Though I also have to say, when it comes to some things, I just have to take some creative, when it comes to some things, I just want to take some creative freedom, and when it comes to other things, I just can't do anything about unrealistic aspects because of limitations of the game. For instance, what at least modern Dutch cities would have is different types of row houses and different designs of houses in every block of houses in general. But that's something that I can't really change up because there's only one set of Dutch houses available. And same sort of goes for flats. I can't just nail the design for flats since there are just no Dutch flats available in the workshop. So things like that, there are many limitations that make it so damn impossible to actually make a Dutch looking city in this game. And I'll actually try to work around those limitations, but sometimes I just fail. So there's that. I do have to say though, what was actually very fun is that somebody else on the City Skylines Reddit, which I did post a link to in just the description, but didn't actually talk about in the video of last time, is actually making a Dutch city as well. Now it is a bit different since it's more like the eastern part of the Netherlands, which is not Holland, which isn't completely flat and isn't below sea level and doesn't really look as empty and boring. But it's quite cool to actually see some other Dutch cities out there as well, and I've definitely found some other ones as well, but still, when it comes to this general style that I'm going for over here, I haven't really found any reference points. So when it comes to some things as well, I'm just way too unexperienced to actually get them right, and that's something that I suppose I want to keep in mind as well. When it comes to some things in this series, I just sort of have to experiment and hope for the best. And one of those things actually, god, that was good timing, is what I'm doing right here. Basically, this is where I decided to try and see if I could get a cauliflower neighborhood going. And if you're not from the Netherlands or you've never heard of cauliflower neighborhoods and are very confused at the moment, it's basically a type of neighborhood, district, whatever you want to call it, that was very popular in the 70s, or really conceived in the 70s in the Netherlands, where you have these really squiggly roads, and they all sort of sprout from a main ring road, which connects them all, and in the end, the sort of idea is that you get a very densely packed, but still very comfortable area with houses, and sort of the main focus on this entire layout is living standard, just make it a very comfortable place to live. And for instance, the speed limit on roads is very low in these type of areas, and roads are used by pedestrians and cars at the same time. And they actually have a Dutch name for it, which I don't know the English translation of. But there's like it's like signaled with special signs that you enter one of these neighborhoods and you can only drive like 1 kilometer an hour. I don't actually know what the exact speed limit on it is, and that's what I wanted to get in here too, and that's basically why the roads are all squiggly over there. That was my first experiment, trying to see what sort of cauliflower neighborhood I wanted to get in there. They actually come in many different shapes and forms and sizes, and they are still built sometimes, though I'm pretty sure they're way less popular than they used to be. but there are round ones and completely square ones. This one just uses 2 angles, in a sense that every single road junction has a 45-degree angle to the next road in that sort of sense. But yeah, what I basically wanted to try here was a pretty simple one that would work with City Skylines' way of designing roads. Basically what you can see me doing each time is get a 90-degree corner between 2 roads and then build another road in between that to make sure that you can actually get a nearly perfect 45-degree corner and just use that to get the very squiggly road pattern that develops like this. And in the middle of it, I wanted to have a very small shopping area, which actually took a bit of trial and error to see what sort of area I wanted to make it into. This is really where I feel one of the big limitations of the game also lie, since you just can't really get the realistic Dutch look of a Dutch shopping area down in this game, where usually you've got one big row of 3 to 4 floors high buildings with shops underneath them, and usually one large flat next to it, and there's one supermarket and a couple of other shops, some of your really necessary shops like a small bakery, hairdresser, things like that. But that's something which I actually had a lot of trouble to actually find out if I could actually do it in the game, and so far I haven't really found a way to do it. So I just went with a much simpler approach over here. I just put down a very common supermarket by the name Aldi. Went with that and attached like a small shopping street next to it, which isn't the most realistic thing, and I'm not entirely happy about it. I suppose I might come back to it later on, but that's just how stuff is at the moment. It's really all I could kind of make out of it. And I'll definitely get back to experimenting with actually trying to see how I can make these shopping streets in the future and build more of them, definitely, because I don't have enough of them at the moment. But it's something which, at this point in time, I was just kind of messing with and seeing how I could actually make it work. This was kind of confusing, by the way. I had those 2 buildings like in the front there, and I wanted to copy them over to the other row of buildings, but every time I tried to copy them over, they would just destroy themselves and build other ones and check the district theme, and that wasn't the issue. And like at the moment, I'm like way more episodes, or I'm like a couple hours more into this game, and those buildings just still persist to disappear each time I try to copy them over. I've no idea why it happens, but I suppose if anybody does know why that happens, it would be amazing to kind of share how you could fix that, because it's kind of a problem at the moment. But in any case, that's the the Cauliflower neighborhood pretty much laid out. What I actually wanted to say was that I used the English row houses rather than the Dutch ones, since they do use 2 tiles each, which gives a lot more freedom into where you're placing your houses and allows more row houses to just be placed everywhere. But one of the big limitations that I found to this type of city building, or I mean this type of neighborhood, is that in many Cauliflower neighborhoods in the Netherlands, the roads sort of function as a way to get to your general area of the house, but most of the houses are actually placed along small pedestrian paths. So usually the road pattern is different from the house pattern. They're usually similar, but they're not entirely placed alongside each other, which is one of the big limitations of City Skylines, since houses do have to face roads and can only be built alongside roads, and I sort of wish that I could actually place them alongside these little pedestrian paths to get more interesting shapes going on with that. And that's basically one of the reasons why I think this Cauliflower neighborhood isn't really too realistic, and less so in the type of houses that are built and the way that the houses sprawl everywhere than the roads. The roads I think are alright, but the houses being placed alongside the roads everywhere is a bit of a painful thing. So if I ever get back to experimenting with Cauliflower neighborhoods, I would definitely want to check out different road types and see how I can, for instance, make the sort of wide footpath road type work in a Cauliflower neighborhood. I'm keeping this one simply because I already put the effort into it. I just don't want to remove it. But there's a couple of things that I might want to work on in the future. Not to mention that I probably want to keep more space open for these little paths behind the houses, because usually behind row houses in the Netherlands you have these little paths that connect the back well, the back of the houses pretty much, to the street or to the backs of other houses. So you can always enter or leave the house from the back door as well as the front door, which is something that I sort of got into in retrospect and just quickly added these paths behind the houses, but they don't really connect too logically. Sometimes don't even connect at all, and that's something that I should probably plan in the future as well. Now this is the part where I decided that I wanted to change the foliage up a bit and get more of an autumn look going over here, which I didn't really have in this part of the city yet. And after that, I think I'm actually getting to the park section. There was actually a part over here which I skipped, and I have no idea anymore what I did in that part. But this should be the more interesting part regardless, where after a couple of trees over here, I wanted to fill in the park in the middle of the roundabout as well, which we'll get to in a second. Oh god, it's still placing bushes. That actually took a while. Now I'm using 2-lane roads over here as opposed to having just one 4-lane roads, because these two 2-lane roads sort of function as a 4-lane road pretty much. But what I like about just having two 2-lane roads is that you have this little green zone in the middle, which you can either just leave green or fill in with scenery and foliage, which I like to do the latter, which is pretty much why I leave that open like that. And I didn't want to use any flowers, or at least keep my flowers to a minimum, because it's autumn pretty much, and there aren't too many flowers that bloom in autumn. There definitely are some, which is quite cool, and I do want to have some flowers here and there, but only really keep them as very rare ornaments. One of the big mistakes when it comes to foliage, or flowers more specifically, that people often tend to make is to spam flowers just about everywhere. And especially for a city, it's kind of hard to take care of all those flowers. But also different flowers bloom in different seasons, so it's nearly impossible to have flowers everywhere. Which is a funny thing coming from a theme park community. It's a thing you can do in theme parks. In some theme parks, when the flowers are well, don't bloom anymore, they just take them out and plant new flowers. Which I think happens at Disney, for example. They just remove their flowers once they're done blooming and just put different flowers in, which is why their stuff is always blooming. But as a city, you're obviously not going to do that. But I did want to have a couple of them here in this park, which you'll see in a second. Now basically with the layout of the park, I was at first thinking that I might want to go just with a very standard sort of palace garden-ish layout, where you have a fountain or some sort of large ornament in the middle of it, and then a very symmetrical path layout leading to the middle in a sort of star-like pattern. But in the end, I decided it was just more fun to just to sort of divide this roundabout into multiple sections and get different sort of foliage in each little section, so that it has a large variety of plants and bushes, but it also doesn't look the same everywhere. So different little flowers and trees and ornaments around the entire park. Given in hindsight, this made it way unrealistically ornamental. Like normally you would just have a couple of simple trees and maybe a couple of benches, but that would normally realistically be about it. I do have to say that I went way overboard already with how this thing looks with all the different shapes and colors that the foliage has. But I'm quite happy, I suppose, about it in the end. I'll just take my creative freedom over there and just be unrealistic about this park. There's a couple of things that I might want to get back to regardless. This was in a time that I didn't have the more beautification mod yet, which allows you to freely place props everywhere and use them as scenery objects. And this also means that at this point in time I didn't really have any ornamental fences yet, but I think in hindsight I might actually want to add some fences to this little park. Not to mention benches. I don't think I have any of them yet. The other parks, or at least the other parts of this park you might call it, where it sort of has these narrow stretches, are just going to be filled with regular trees and not flowers everywhere, since I sort of wanted the roundabout park to be the centerpiece, but then the parks that are connected to that, keep those more simple and just add trees to it, but none of these shrubs that follow the path or flowers or things like that. Though I did want to keep the autumn look to it, which is something which, at this point in time, I'm still not too sure how much I like it, but there's no going back from it, pretty much, since if I want to go back from my autumn theme, I would have to remove over 50% of the city trees, which would be a pain. But it's something which I think will look a lot better once I actually get to the rural side of this city, and also start fixing the trees that are currently outside my dike over there, and currently outside my city in general, and just placed by the map itself. Because the weird thing at the moment is that every tree in the map outside of my city is just normal sort of summer tree forest without any autumn trees. But within the city there are like all sorts of red and orange and yellow trees, which is a bit of an illogical thing at the moment. Also, one thing that I should probably say about this is that supposedly it's like early autumn in the city, but there is a bit of an unrealistic amount of autumn colored trees for that in the city, to be perfectly honest. Not to mention that the overall city follows one type of biome in general, though there's some change when it comes to the trees here and there, but it follows one set of trees and bushes in general over the entire city in the same sort of well, really variety of trees, which is a bit unrealistic. I would probably in the future want to mix it up a bit. And what I think the problem is with the foliage of the city at the moment is that the foliage is too diverse, as in it's got too many different trees mixed together, but it's not diverse enough when it comes to looking at the entire city. Oh god, that's a confusing story. Basically, it's diverse as in so many trees closely packed together everywhere, but it's the same set of trees almost around the entire city. And as a bit of feedback to myself, but I suppose also the people out there, it's better to keep the foliage less diverse in individual places, so use less different trees around a specific area, but make sure to make it a little bit more diverse around the entire city. So for example, a birch forest in one place where you use mainly birches, and a different type of tree forest in another place. I don't know English tree names, I feel like an idiot. But yeah, that's the basic idea of it. I took a small sidestep over here to make the highway. What you didn't see over here is that I made a bridge over the river and sort of made a completely new highway over here, because that wasn't here before, but that was just me struggling to get the bridge right, because basically one of the things that's always irritated me about the road system over here, it's not necessarily irritating, but it's hard to get a Dutch look with it, is the fact that as soon as you go higher than 6 meters, it already starts turning into a bridge when you're building a road. But the issue is that normally you would have a little hill underneath the road, and only where it actually has to cross something like a train track or a road underneath it, you have a small bridge, and then as soon as it's over it, you get that small hill again, which it uses to go down. And in City Skylines, you're much more prone to just have an entire bridge without that little ramp of ground completely supporting it until it actually goes over what it has to go over. So when it comes to that stuff, this is something that I still want to get back to in the future, and still want to remove some of these bridges and replace them just with raised ground with a highway on it, to make sure that not everything starts looking like a bridge. Not to mention something which I just randomly thought of, which I've got some feedback about as well, is the fact that Dutch people really like their, or rather I should say, Dutch people don't like their noise from their highways. But quite often there aren't actually these screens to stop the sound, but large grass hills, which I think is something that I might want to get alongside this highway, and possibly in some other places as well. So basically there would be a large grass hill alongside the highway, and who am I kidding, that you've got that in other countries as well, which is something that I want to get in here as well. Rather than just having a normal screen to block the sound, because the screens, I think, are not really too great. I mean, usually there's a little patch of grass, or really, a small space of grass between the sound barrier and the highway itself. This is where I wanted to get the second part of the same Cauliflower neighborhood in, really. It's going to follow the same basic layouts and way of building it. And with this together, it's pretty much going to be one neighborhood of the city where it's just a Cauliflower layout. It does stand out a lot against the other neighborhoods, and I think in the future I want to make the transition a little bit more subtle. You could already see from those couple of shots of the entire city, and it's a very sudden transition from this straight layout to the very crooked layout of the Cauliflower neighborhood. So that's something I might want to revisit in the future and add a small park in between them to at least make the transition a little less sudden. Or perhaps just a part where the road is just very random and squiggly because there's an older part of town that doesn't have row houses, but just detached houses. Not to mention that detached houses is something that I have to get to in the future, definitely. I don't really have any of them yet, but it's something that you do also see quite often. It's not just row houses all the time, but it is for Cauliflower neighborhoods and the straight road layouts of the 50s and 60s, but also the 90s and later. So the majority will still definitely be row houses, but in the future I want to have some spaces here and there where you just have standalone detached houses. And something that I should probably also mention is the fact that I'm definitely going to remove the university at some point in the future, and just move it to someplace more out of the city. Actually got a really good comment back on the last video about the fact that the placement of the university is just really bad at the moment, and I should definitely move it out of the city, especially considering how new of a city this is, and how not really too large of a city this is. Usually the only universities that are very close to the city center are in like older cities, so I want to move that out, and then when that space is available after I get rid of that university, I think I'll just turn that into a park as well, because that part of the city doesn't really have too many parks. That said, I won't really make the city much larger than it currently is when it comes to actual house areas. In the next episode, I just want to start adding more details and props to the city, so just want to make some individual playgrounds everywhere, add some, primary schools with some individual playgrounds, which is a lot of fun to make actually, and little elements that make the city look more realistic overall. And then in the episode after that, I'm gonna go into farms and making the polders around the city and see how I could make that look, and see how I could sort of make the transition from the city itself to the rural areas outside of it. But yeah, that'll really be almost about it. As soon as I add those polders around the city, you can kind of start seeing where the city is gonna end and where the rural areas around it are gonna begin. And I don't think I really want to quite make this city much larger than it currently is. What I think I would much rather prefer to do is to actually get some smaller towns around this city, and not just turn this into one city, but make this one larger rural area. Because realistically, one of the things that I should keep in mind is the fact that the Netherlands just doesn't have any really large cities at all. It has a large area of cities that are almost interconnected, but usually a very small green space with farms and very small towns is kept between the cities to make sure that the country doesn't look as overpopulated as it is a simple way to put it probably. So keeping that in mind, I also probably want to make this entire area quite densely populated and have quite some farms and small villages around the city and sort of turn it into its own little mini province. But I won't make the city itself too large. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. I'm not gonna make too many living areas, just want to get to some industrial-ish districts, a small port around the city, and some of the entertainment things like a ski dome and stuff like that. And most likely, especially given, you know, my main sort of interests, I think I'll get a theme park in this city, or at least outside of the city somewhere alongside the highway, because I definitely want to mess around with the theme park and the assets for theme parks that I already have, which could be a lot of fun. Not to mention some different designated areas that you usually find around the city, like a really large space just for sporting fields, like a lot of soccer fields, a couple of tennis fields, and some athletic stuff all around one area probably. And also definitely a some sort of place where water is pumped and purified and things like that. Because right now I don't have any of those. I don't know what you would call it, but basically a place where you would have all that water stuff. I really don't know. But yeah, that was really almost about it for this episode. I just wanted to quickly fill in all of these trees and get that over with. And as a last sort of overview how this flying camera is shot, just to be able to see a little bit better what I've actually made over here. Here you can see that that fucking commercial building decided to remove itself again and like placed a European corner building over there, which is kind of annoying. Speaking of corner buildings, I might want to remove the corner buildings for all of these row houses, since you don't really find them too often in the Netherlands. But yeah, this is a little park with the overview of the two flats at the end of it. It's still got a sort of communistic vibe to me, so I'm really still not too sure about these flats. Not to mention that they've also got a very much a 50s neighborhood vibe to them, which I'm also not too sure if I want to have that. And this shot sort of following the main road that goes through the city, which is still taking the traffic. It's pretty good so far. But yeah, that's about it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next episode, in which I actually use some props to beautify the city, and hopefully the time-lapse should be a little bit better than until now. But as always, feedback is welcome anyway. So yeah, thanks for watching, and bye.